And we're recording. And Dr. Zerai, if you want to get us started.
Welcome, everyone. We're so excited to see you here today. We have an exciting panel with Dr. Tiffany Lee, Dr. Leola Paquin, Dr. Tsinnajinnie, as well as our hostess for today, Pam Agoyo, to discuss Beyond Land Acknowledgements. So again, thanks so much for joining us, and I will turn it over to Lorena and Pam.
Thank you, Dr. Zerai. If you'd like to learn more about our panelists, please feel free to visit our website at diverse.unm.edu, and under our American Indian Heritage Month page, you'll be able to find their bios, and they'll also introduce themselves shortly. But before we get started, we want to go ahead and read our Indigenous Peoples Land and Territory Acknowledgement. Founded in 1889, the University of New Mexico sits on the traditional homelands of the Pueblo of Sandia. The original peoples of New Mexico, Pueblo, Navajo, and Apache, since time immemorial, have deep connection to the land and have made significant contributions to the broader community statewide. We honor the land itself and those who remain stewards of the land throughout the generations, and also acknowledge our committed relationship to Indigenous peoples. We gratefully recognize our history. And this was developed by many of the people that are in today's webinar, and we'll go more into it in a few moments. But we're really excited also to share for those of us joining us from our Taos branch. They also put together a land and territory acknowledgement that we'd like to also read today. The University of New Mexico Taos sits on the traditional homelands of the Red Willow people of Taos Pueblo. The original peoples of current day New Mexico, Pueblo, Navajo, and Apache, since time immemorial, have deep connections to the land and have made significant contributions to the broader community statewide. We honor the land itself and those who remain stewards of this land throughout the generations, and also acknowledge our committed relationship to Indigenous peoples. We gratefully recognize our history and work to maintain healthy, fruitful relationships with our neighbors for generations to come. And I will pass it over to Pam Agoyo, who is the Director of American Indian Student Services and also the Special Assistant to the President on American Indian Affairs, who will moderate today's panel. Thank you, Pam.
Thank you, Lorena. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm really happy to spend a little bit of time with you this afternoon and talk about some of the work that's been happening on our campus. But first, I would like to have an opportunity for our distinguished panelists to introduce themselves before we get started with the discussion. So Dr. Tiffany Lee.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you, Lorena and Dr. Zerai, for opening us up and getting us going. I'm Tiffany Lee, Department Chair and Professor in Native American Studies here at UNM. Tiffany Lee Nishia, de Bethlejana Nishle, Natlana Bashish Chin, Tsinnajinnie Dasha Chedo, Natlana Dashanala, Twansala de Nasha, Be Dil Dasanelli Nashnish, Diet Aue de Diet Aue Denet Sana A Nishle. Thank you, everyone. I'm happy to be here. Basically said that I am the Black Sheep Clan from Crystal, New Mexico, and I'm also Lakota from South Dakota. Thank you.
Dr. Paquin.
Thank you. Yate Leola Tsinnajinnie Piquan Yanipino, Filipino Nishla, Tsinnajinnie Bashishchin, Filipino Dashache, Tsinnajinnie Dashanala, Acknowledging Dat Nasha, Rio Rancho de Chitan, University of New Mexico de Nashnish. So I am faculty with Native American Studies. I am an assistant professor. I am Filipino on my mom's side, and from Torreon, the community of Torreon, New Mexico on my dad's side. Thank you for having me.
Dr. Tsinnajinnie.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Yate Leonie Simejini Yinashe, Filipino Nishla, Tsinnajinnie Bashishchin, Filipino Dashache. Hello, everyone. My name is Leonie Simejini. I'm an assistant professor in community and regional planning. And I am also from the community of Tsinnajinnie, New Mexico, and I am Leola's little sister.
Thank you all. So, just to provide, I think, some context, and because, panelists, as you know, land acknowledgements are not new to us. We have been doing them since time immemorial, so to speak, in our own way and in our own communities. And I think that one of the most important things that we can do is to ground ourselves and accept responsibility to the animals and the water and the peoples of this place and of this land. And that's part of why we have always done land acknowledgements in our own way. And additionally, it really is an opportunity to strive to be the embodiment of the power of the place where we live, work, and learn. And, along with it comes this shared responsibility for honoring and protecting and caretaking this place and this land. And so I think we'll get started with, those are the kinds of things that I think of personally as a land acknowledgement, and the kinds of things I was taught growing up in my Palo communities. I'm from Okeawinge and Cochiti and Kiwa. And so it's always just been part of just our regular existence. And so I think we'll get started initially with talking about why a land acknowledgement was developed at the University of New Mexico, and a little bit about the process. And so Dr. Lee, I think we'll take a moment to talk about that before we really talk about what it actually means to the university community here and the Native community, because I think it definitely means different things. But, you and I have been on this campus for a good amount of time and dedicated our careers here. So, we have been in the practice of doing land acknowledgements in our own programming and in our own events for many, many years, long before this notion of a land acknowledgement became popular. And so, I want to talk a little bit about how we got to today. And really, I think it's our current president, President Stokes, who really sort of elevated this notion of ensuring that the university had a higher level of consciousness regarding land acknowledgements, but wanting to do it in a way that was responsible and in a way that was certainly informed by Native people, and really the brilliance and the extraordinary intellect of our Native faculty who really sort of drive the knowledge pieces around Indigenous learning on our campus. So do you want to talk about the original sort of white paper that was developed by a small cohort of Native faculty and what the thought was behind that?
Sure, thanks, Pam. Yeah, I agree with you first on the sentiment that Indigenous people have always had land acknowledgements, and primarily, I think it's through our prayers. Our prayers acknowledge the land, the water, the mountains, and all the more than human life, and showing our thanks for being a part of, that larger life system. And I think land acknowledgements, it was the spring of 2017, if I remember, there was the Native American Faculty Council, a small group decided to come together to start to draft the white paper, which then we started calling the brown paper, to delineate why this was important, to show the university leadership and the university community sort of why a land acknowledgement would be important for the University of New Mexico to adopt. And it was also, I think, in line with a general larger movement that we were seeing nationwide across universities and communities with developing similar land acknowledgement statements. So it wasn't that, we felt like it was important to, especially in a place like New Mexico, where we have such a vibrant and visible population of Indigenous people, to make sure that we were also attending to those kinds of land acknowledgements on a broader scale, not just within our own, units or smaller communities. So I think it started there with the draft document, and we kind of went back and forth. The Native American Faculty Council was large and had a lot of different kind of input. We all took sections to draft out, like, sort of what's the demographic of New Mexico, and who are the Indigenous people here, and what have they contributed to our state, and then we drafted out a statement, but then it had a lot of back and forth. And then I remember I think you were able to work with the president to actually do it. The first time I ever heard it was in was it December 2019 winter convocation of students? I think it was 2019. It's all a blur now, right? From the
Yeah.
last.
Yeah. She actually, she had originally inquired about a land acknowledgement because before she became president, she actually came to our American Indian convocation, and she witnessed sort of the entire program, and so she asked about it. And part of onboarding a new president, they get a ton of documents and a ton of reading material to kind of get them up to speed with the climate at the university, and the original white paper was one of those documents. So actually she held her first tribal consultation in the fall of 2018, and that was really the first time that a university president, in my experience and in my knowledge, has actually been deliberate and intentional in delivering a land acknowledgement. So that was the first time in terms of a public statement. And then you're right, it was folded into the next spring into commencement for the spring, and then freshman convocation, and on and on, sort of the more public facing events that the president was doing. So yeah, you're right. It's been a while. And then we got to a place, I think in early 2019, right, where the UNM Diversity Council, because this was kind of something that we were doing, the president really wanted to make it a permanent part of our identity, so to speak. And I know that the Native Faculty Council kind of, and members of that council, I remember meeting with you and saying, this is what the president is currently saying, and has been saying since fall of October, really, of 2018. And then, there was some modifications at that point, and that's how we certainly have arrived at the current statement. So that's just a little bit of a background about where we are. I think the most important part is that, the original white paper, and then certainly the brown paper, that's kind of the most recent iteration of trying to educate the campus community on a much broader spectrum about land acknowledgements. I think the Native Faculty Council has done a great job of indicating that those are living documents, right? Meaning that knowledge continues to evolve and develop. And so, and with that, so does our university, ideally, hopefully. And so, they could, the Native Faculty Council, continue to contribute those kinds of things. So I want to shift a little bit to thinking about, what it means to the Native community to actually have a land acknowledgement. And in my personal opinion, certainly it's really about recentering Indigenous presence on our campus. I think for those of us who have been here a long time, and even those who are newly arrived, sometimes that's not really apparent. But it's also recognizing the disposition of homelands, right? That institutions are currently built on, and where they occupy space. And more importantly, it's creating visibility for tribal nations, certainly for our Native student, faculty, and staff community at this institution. So I want to bring in now Dr. Tsinnajinnie and Dr. Paquin, and can you talk a little bit about what it means to the Native community to have land acknowledgements? How about we go with Dr. Paquin first?
You didn't want to wait for the standoff. Thank you. Thank you for sending it over to us. So the way I see it, it's kind of like a flow. I see it, there's definitely the rooted background, and it's always been embedded in our core values and our beliefs and our prayer and the way we pray. And now it's an opportunity to see that recognition from the university level. And of course, it's not a be all end all, but it is an opening to conversations that can be had. What is a land acknowledgement? What is the history behind it? What's it for? And why is it necessary? And through those conversations, it opens up spaces for education, even just within our own families, or maybe political leaders, or our non-native relatives. It does allow the opportunity to educate each other again. And it does, for those natives maybe outside and even within the university community, we see there is that beginning connection or embedded connection, long-standing connection to who we are, our core values, and our relationships to the land, to non-human beings, to each other, to our clans. I know for me, when I include it in the syllabus, I not only include the official statement, the link to the brown paper, which I appreciate that DEI keeps housed on the website, but I also include my own recognition of these are my clans. This is the work that I do at the university, not to say, this is my resume, but this is how I'm holding myself accountable to my community and to my role in NAS. But I think most importantly, and I might change my mind, but today I think most importantly, I feel like the land acknowledgement, now that it's been dispersed faculty-wide, I see a lot of it in the syllabuses, especially when I'm reviewing them for the Digital Learning Center for Teaching and Learning online reviews, and I see it in the syllabi. Syllabi, I heard it's both ways, but I see it in there. And to me, I think back to when I was a student, and if I saw those things in the syllabus, I really think that it's a recognition of me, because I think oftentimes as Native students, we feel invisible or unseen. I'm always going to feel like a student, but to see that from my instructor embedded in the syllabus, I think that's a strong statement of welcoming and recognition. So I think that's one of the most powerful aspects of the land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Dr. Paquin. Dr. Tsinnajinnie, you want to talk a little bit about your perspective?
Sure. And yeah, I just agree with everything that Dr. Paquin contributed just now. And then also, yeah, kind of going off of what you said earlier of how, talking about land acknowledgements and how they have, different meanings. When I was working with the Native American Faculty Council recently to provide the latest update of the brown paper, it became pretty clear that, everyone has different meanings of what land acknowledgements are, especially with them becoming so, or becoming more popular. And Dr. Lee said, and that you mentioned, for Native people, it's more of the spiritual meaning. But when institutions have it, there's different meanings, where we're just recognizing the land itself. We're recognizing the original caretakers of the land and the current caretakers of the land, or we could be recognizing who and anyone who's had historical connections to the land. And so, yeah, there's just so many meanings that can be taken from a land acknowledgement. But I think, within the UNM community, like what Dr. Paquin mentioned, it's a way to become, just more visible, or making Indigenous peoples more visible. And I started at UNM as an undergrad, almost 20 years ago. And so I remember, even though, I wasn't far away from home, I still remember sitting in those classrooms and feeling, just invisible, and only feeling connected when I was at AI or Native American Studies classes, or when there were other Native students. Seeing this land acknowledgement, in our syllabus and other parts around campus, and also and just having it present and having it spark the dialogue and consciousness of of our people and our lands, and how UNM is situated here. It's just has that very impactful, is just very impactful of just acknowledging us in the first place. And I think the meaning is, as you mentioned, the land acknowledgement is, and the brown paper, they're both like living and they're going to continue to be developed. And so I think the meaning of it will continue to evolve as well. And, so I think it's just like, up to the university of like what we do from here, of how that meaning will continue to evolve as well.
Just want to
Thank
add
you.
really
Yeah,
quick,
Dr. Lee, sure.
just that the brown paper, it does offer suggestions on how to use the land acknowledgement statement for community members, for departments, for student groups, how to use in the syllabi. So it's really great to hear, Dr. Paquin, that there's more syllabi that includes the land acknowledgement statement. And I think for UNM in particular, it's important as an example of UNM trying to not just be more inclusive, but change its structure. And I think where it might, and I know we'll lead into this, but we don't want it to become just a formulaic or routine kind of gesture, right? So it's understanding what is UNM as we're not a land grant university, but we sit on the Pueblo Oxandia land and then all the indigenous land around us. And so what is, thinking beyond the acknowledgement, what does that mean specifically for UNM and the impact it's had on that Pueblo community and the other rest of the Native communities of our state. So.
Yeah, absolutely, Dr. Lee, thank you for that. As I mentioned, personally, I feel that acknowledging the land is one of the most important things we do, but that really comes from, my own upbringing and what I do on a daily basis, which is strongly connected to prayers, Dr. Lee, as you mentioned before. And while it's beautiful to have arrived at this place and all the work and the labor that's been done and the care, right? Really the Native Faculty Council, and I've said this before, in developing both the white paper that evolved to the newer brown paper, that you really gifted those things to the university, quite frankly. And I think Indigenous peoples have been gifting many communities outside of the boundaries of their own areas for many, many years. And, land acknowledgements are important, but I think the danger, and I think what I'm seeing and what I have seen for probably a couple of years in different spaces is that, it's a slippery slope because they can become performative. And you spoke a little bit to this, Dr. Lee, but also even perpetuate sort of the erasure of Native peoples and communities, sort of talking and thinking about Native peoples as sort of in the past and not in the present. And I think the other important aspect of land acknowledgements is to remember that it's important not to let a land acknowledgement become a checkbox activity, right? Or the completion of a diversity initiative, because Native people were not diversity initiatives, right? We have a distinct political status. And I think oftentimes that's lost in things like land acknowledgements, as valuable as they are. Those are realities as well too. So I'd like to really talk about other ways that the institution can not only honor and continue to do this. And to your point earlier, Dr. Lee, I think one of the most recent, I think, turn of events with respect to the land acknowledgement is that the UNM Board of Regents, after the statement was adopted, the Board of Regents now is including it in their meetings. And I do credit Regent Sandra Begay with that. We've had several conversations about the importance of really demonstrating that in order to shift the campus climate and the culture of this institution, sort of behaviors and practices really need to start at the top. And the Board of Regents is really sort of, when you think about the structure of this institution, the top. And so they started adopting it last year in their meetings. And while I think it's important, there is this element of I think what I would call performative nature as well too. So can we talk a little bit about the other ways that the institution in particular can honor and demonstrate their commitment really to both developing and modeling practices that advance both Indigenous thought, the Indigenous community on our campus, scholarship, all of, relationship with tribal communities. So I'm going to start with you, Dr. Tsinnajinnie, if you want to take that question first, and then we'll go to Dr. Lee and then Dr. Paquin.
I was expecting my elders to go first before me. No, but yeah, I think there's just like, endless possibilities for this to happen. And I think, the simplest way is, I think, to continually revisit the land acknowledgement and our relationships to Native communities, and, think of ways like we could, give back without wanting something in return to our Native communities. Another way that we could honor our Native heritage and Native culture is to, divest from extractive industries that harm our lands and our environment, which in turn harm our people and harm our communities, and invest in ways that the university can contribute to restoring our land and supporting the caretakers of the land and the environment. And so I think, we could also, and that's not just like thinking about like direct university investments. I know there's a movement from, certain groups to divest from, fossil fuel industries from the UNM Foundation, but to think more broadly about that, in thinking about or rethinking our research objectives and curriculum as well, in the ways to so that our faculty and students all across campus are more aware of the social and environmental justice issues that affect our communities, but also that they're more aware of the contributions that Native peoples and Native communities make as well. And also, I think another thing we can do is do events like this year round, and not just make it around October and November, where we think about, that's where, those are the months where we typically focus on Indigenous Peoples' Day and Native American Heritage Month, but these things need to happen year round.
Absolutely. Dr. Lee?
Yeah, sure. I think, following up with Dr. Tsinnajinnie, there's a lot of things we could do, and we should definitely keep the conversation going beyond this with leadership and the rest of the university community about how to go beyond the land acknowledgement or extend from it. I think, going back to my earlier point that, for the university community and the local community to really embrace a land acknowledgement and Indigenous perspectives, they have to also be very willing to learn about the specific people of the land that where they sit, where they reside, where they work, where they call, home. It's really an opportunity for truth sharing, for transformative knowledge sharing. I think, often the one thing I think the land acknowledgements do is create Indigenous perspectives as sort of a monolithic group or a monolithic entity. And we have to get away from that. Like you said before, Pam, it can lead to also an erasure or just sort of a diminishment of who Indigenous people are and the diversity of our communities. I think, a way that, so in a sense, the acknowledgement also has to be followed up with an accountability to how the university community in particular has been shaped by the displacement of Pueblo, Apache, and Navajo people. And just, again, going back to truth sharing about that and being open and honest, that's where you want to change the world. If you've seen wrong that has been done, you want to do something about it, right? And we've learned that in Native American studies. I think a more specific way that we can go beyond land acknowledgement as a university is supporting our Native American students who come to UNM because they come from these lands, and provide them with, perhaps, we have a lot of out-of-state students. We were just talking about this earlier in our faculty meeting. that could benefit from an in-state tuition rate or a tuition waiver, for example, that really shows a university's commitment to these students. And that's going beyond a land acknowledgement and supporting, also their initiatives, their academic, their social, emotional well-being with resources, which we have, but, and we need to continue to acknowledge and support. But also we have longstanding organizations such as the Kiva Club that puts on a powwow every year. They could use more university support, stable, consistent support as a university's way of expressing, that they acknowledge and want to continue that sort of, activity here at UNM. So I'll stop there.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Lee. Dr. Paquin?
Yeah, thank you all. So in terms of, I really like how we're acknowledging the people of the land and honoring them through specifically, literally honoring the land, like Lani said, being true caretakers of the land, restoring it. And like Dr. Lee said, really taking care of our students, whether it be through tuition. A lot of these recommendations, they've been recommendations since the beginning of the university, right? And, continuing to honor those things, just like the white paper was started by faculty in 2017. I remember kind of not participating in these meetings. So when this new opportunity came, I said, okay, I better make my contribution now and help contribute to the brown paper. So, keeping a good historical record so that, we are going in cycles, but understanding we're still making progress, even though we are going in these cycles. And then building off of this idea of building off of our work, the DEI, who's hosting this, this panel right now, we have the Diversity Council, and within the Diversity Council is the Diversity Curriculum Subcommittee. And that committee oversees the U.S. Global Diversity and Equity requirement that's required for all UNM students to complete. And all of the Native American Studies classes are on there. So by taking a Native American Studies class, you can fulfill that requirement. But I'm thinking that, we not only expand the diversity requirement to 6 units, which we've been talking about, but at least have 3 of those units be an Indigenous focus requirement. So it doesn't necessarily have to be from Native American Studies, but it could be from any class from across the university that fulfills those needs, where we're really truly learning about the people of this land. So that would be my recommendation in terms of the university really putting teeth and heart behind a requirement and saying you need to fulfill this educational objective to be a graduate of this university.
Thank you all. You bring up really some really great points, and I wanted to just kind of interject some of my thoughts. You all also are in the academic affairs side of the institution, and I'm in student affairs. So, my everyday life and interaction is all about students. So I wholeheartedly agree with you with respect to more support for Native students, and in particular financial support as we think about costs of attendance, right, rising tuition, and there's all this talk nationally about debt for loan forgiveness for students, like those kinds of things. I think it's an opportunity for this institution to take a really good look at where are those opportunities for us to also demonstrate as an institution, right, that we have an awareness and a genuine consciousness about ensuring that we expand our own responsibility to tribal students. But, first and foremost, and I want to get your opinions about this, but, I think that personally, and this is me, again, I work with students all the time, and this is not to diminish the significant contributions that faculty and staff, make on a daily basis to this institution. But, for me, I would like to see just a genuine, I think, embracing by the institution of the cultural wealth and assets of our students. I think that, the only reason this institution exists is because of students. If there were no students, we wouldn't have an institution, right? And I know that I'm biased because I work with students every day. So that's really part of what I see first and foremost that the institution has to commit to. I also think that, along with that, now is as good a time as any to really create this strong historical consciousness and develop what I would consider an action agenda that's aligned with the land acknowledgement. So for those of us who have been here for a long time, some of these things have been suggested for many, many years, and haven't really gotten the traction I think that they need. I think that this institution needs a particular space and place. So aside from us acknowledging that we are in this place and on this land and in this space, the university, in my humble opinion, also needs to work really hard to think about establishing a center, a place on this campus that can highlight and house and contribute to student learning, to faculty scholarship, to staff initiatives that are happening here. I think all of you were aware several years ago, there was this movement, and we did a lot of work. An RFP went out to architectural firms, and we did many focus groups with different constituencies across the campus. And really a plan was developed to establish an American Indian Learning and Leadership Center. And the idea would be that this would be a place that Native student organizations would have a home, their own home in this facility, that Native American Studies would have a home there, that American Indian Student Services would have a home there. And there are a variety of programs and departments across the campus that are focused on Native scholarship and research as well, that could also have a home there, but also to have a place where our communities could come outside of the institution, could come and be a part of the university community, right? That it would be this exchange too, where our tribal leadership could come and know that this was the place that is a home to the entire Native community on this campus. And so I see those things. And then I think the other thing that I see as opportunities that the university has before it is to adequately fund and resource programs that have been in existence for a very long time on this campus that are really sorely underfunded. So many of these efforts, Native American Studies, I think of, the College of Education, the Institute for Indigenous Education, for example, the Center for Native American Health. When I think of the School of Architecture and the Indigenous Planning initiative that's going on there, and there are countless. So, I know I put myself at risk when I don't mention everything, but there are literally hundreds on this campus, right? Those are what I would consider grassroots efforts that don't have permanent funding from the institution. It's not part of the instructional and general base funding here. And all of those efforts and the intellectual property that has been utilized to develop those efforts are really funded mostly by either grants or legislative appropriations. So always in a sort of a tenuous space, because the sustainability piece is absent, right? And so I want your thoughts. I mean, those are the three areas that I think certainly the university could contribute to. So, and I just want to get your feedback about those kinds of things. I think, funding is always an issue, but, I think about the fact that as the first peoples of this nation, and certainly when you think about the fact that when, colonizers first came to this area, and this place was not uninhabited. I think people would like to think that was the case, but that's not the case. And so one of those ways to honor the peoples that were here originally is to, I think, be intentional about developing just permanent funding streams to ensure that these things can be advanced. So I do want your feedback about those things. And so I'm gonna leave it up to you who wants to go first.
I will, being the elder in the group. I thank you for saying that, Pam. I think I'm in full support of an American Indian Learning and Leadership Center. I think it's not, it wouldn't, it's not necessarily that it's not new, it just hasn't been developed here. But you do see such centers at many universities across the United States with much smaller populations of Native American students, and in Canada. There's ways for the community to support it. It doesn't have to be just in a university funded, initiative, but I know in Native American Studies, we would be down for helping out with that in terms of the advocacy for it. But I think it also could really strengthen something that in Native American Studies we really value is doing community-based and community-engaged research, teaching, and service. It kind of all overlap with each other, but it could really strengthen that aspect to show the community there's a place that the university has for them to develop such collaborations. And it doesn't have to be just with Native American Studies. It could be any university or department or researcher who wants to collaborate with Native American communities, because we have many interests and we have many needs. It's a place to come together and articulate that kind of research scholarship plan and really create an atmosphere of reciprocity, not one of where the university goes in as pilot researchers, extracts knowledge, and then gets famous off the knowledge and nothing else happens in the community. So it could really strengthen that reciprocal, respectful collaboration, I think.
Absolutely.
I can expand on something that I've been thinking about, because it's close to home. So both Lani and I mentioned how we're from Torreon. We grew up in our community, and this is our home. This is where our families are from, where our husbands are from, and we want to have a career here. And I think about all the other scholars who have similar stories, who their heart is here, their work is here, and they are, they want to have careers in academia. But when it comes to finding that right timing, when something's available in our field at UNM or anywhere in New Mexico, those windows aren't big, and it's not a window that one person can crawl through. There's a lot of people, who have those same dreams. And so what I was thinking about, in terms of the university really standing behind the Latin acknowledgement is all the things we've mentioned before, but also honoring those scholars from Native nations in New Mexico who want to do their work that is rooted in their communities, and having an opportunity that builds upon, the idea of like the cluster hire initiative or the postdoc initiatives, but something to where it offers true incentives to departments with a clear-cut opportunity for Native scholars to, position themselves and provide applications. This is what I want to do because I'm rooted here, and this is what I have to contribute. That's sponsored at the highest level of the university, that doesn't impact the hiring plans of the department and their objectives. It would be kind of in addition to, not like a BIE Indian preference, but it is something where it does privilege the scholars of this land. So we're not constantly living in anxiety of how can I make my contribution as a PhD, but there's a clear-cut road to it. Obviously we can't have every single person, but I think a clear-cut road and pathway would be really nice. In addition to that, we could also have create an interdisciplinary pool of something like elder scholars or scholars of practice that all departments could draw from, that really identifies experts from and of this land that any department in the university could call upon, for when the need arises to offer a teaching or any sort of expertise to the department.
Thank you, Dr. Piquan. I think you make a really great point. And last week I was in tribal consultation meeting with President Stokes and other administrators, and Dr. Lee was present as well too. And one of the, this is kind of aligned with what you mentioned, but, tribal leaders did point out that, it's wonderful to see Native people advancing with their educations and those kinds of things, but also in our communities, we have PhDs of our own who have never really stepped foot inside an institution. And how might we think about inviting them and accommodating that kind of knowledge that really can advance the experience of the entire university community, right? Our people in our communities who have this cultural knowledge, and it's a little bit about what I mentioned earlier about the institution acknowledging the cultural wealth and assets of our students, but more importantly, our community, and how do we think about infusing that as well. So thank you for that point. Dr. Tsinnajinnie, you want to provide your perspective?
Sure, and I think I'm on the same page with all of you with this question. And yeah, the top of my list was tuition waivers and just more general support for our Native students. And also developing this physical space that could, be there to support our students and to be there for our Native community to come together on campus. And then additionally, I agree that we have several great programs that engage with Native communities or build relationships and are focused on supporting our Native communities, and that we need more support for those programs and departments. And we also need to do a better job of promoting those programs and departments. And especially when I hear, a lot of, talk about other institutions that, seem to be leading in, offering, programs that support our communities. But to me, I'm like, no, we have more at UNM. You just don't hear about it that much. And so, yeah, I think we need to make ourselves known for all that we do. And then also, like Dr. Paquin mentioned, is just to, I think we need to hire more Native faculty. And as since I've been faculty here the last 3.5 years, I've been just it's been a great experience, and I'm happy to be here, but I'm, just overwhelmed with the amount of work and requests I get, just because of who I represent and the work that I do with engaging with Native communities. And I think, it just shows that, more of us are needed all across campus. And more support for our work is needed as well, so that we can stay competitive with other universities and we're not drawn away. And so I think additionally, in kind of related to that, we need the training for all our faculty and other researchers, and in how to ethically and respectfully build relationships with our Native communities here. Just, the amount of requests we get to, make these connections, and, be a part of grants and collaborations and other things like that is just overwhelming, and we can't do it all, but it doesn't mean that it shouldn't happen. But, we want those things to happen, but people need to know how to do it respectfully and ethically as well. And then finally, I think, making sure that, everyone in the community undergoes anti-racism training is, a major way to support, the student, staff, and faculty here at UNM. When I was a student, or when I was an undergrad, I remember being at an event where we had Native musicians, and, a student came from class and, shouted, racial slurs at the performers and at our students. And it was really harmful for us. And, that happened, almost 20 years ago, but, it's hard to see, anything that's I think it just goes to show that this has happened, this is something that's been present since the university, or this type of training is still needed. And yeah, that's all that I'll add right now. I think I could go on.
Thank you, Dr. Tsinnajinnie. One of the things that I want to point out, because I know that there are likely also some individuals who also might be joining this session who might not know a lot about the institution, and those who are here who don't know some of the things that are going on and have been going on for quite some time. So I just want to take a little bit of time to maybe provide a recap. So, as you all are likely aware, the University of New Mexico enjoys the largest enrollment of Native students in a Research One institution across this country. That's significant, right? And so in and of itself, like that is an opportunity to really think about, okay, so students are certainly coming here, and Dr. Lee, I think you mentioned the diversity of tribes. So certainly we're not just centered around New Mexico tribes, but I think about American Indian Student Services in the last academic year, for example. We provided support to students from over 134 different tribes on this campus, and we know that there are many more tribes represented on this campus from students that are coming here, but we don't know every single Native student. I don't know that any program on or department on this campus does know that. I think there are lots of intersections with our students, but that's a vast number in terms of tribal representatives from across the country. And I think with respect to when I think about costs of attendance, so Native students certainly are the recipients of federal dollars, much like any other student with respect to Pell Grants and supplemental opportunity grants, sort of what I would call gift aid and general scholarships. But, Native students also too, when you think about poverty levels, tribal communities and Native people still are the poorest of the poor of all communities in this country. And we see that with high rates of Pell eligibility for our students as well. So certainly being able to provide additional resources for students coupled with federal gift aid is important. Tribes also contribute a significant amount of money to fund tribal scholarships. That also adds to that. And the university has since 1994 has had in place what we call, as a result of memorandums of understanding with tribes, one tuition specific scholarship to every tribe and in New Mexico in particular, but that's one. And while it's, the university has made it pretty easy for tribes to determine, which one of their students they would like to receive it. It's certainly not enough by any stretch of the imagination when you compare that to our overall Native student enrollment here. And also students who reside outside of New Mexico, but who are enrolled members of New Mexico tribes, they do receive, for tuition purposes, resident tuition rates, but expanding that beyond to all tribal nations in the country is likely, in my opinion, a step in the right direction when we think about that. Dr. Tsinnajinnie, you brought up a really important point about how you will hear about what other institutions are doing, and the kinds of things that are happening. And we often will say, well, we've been doing that for however many years, or yes, we, of course we do that, and ours is even, whatever. In addition to that, we're doing this, right? But you're absolutely right in the fact that, we don't do a good job of getting the word out there. And I think part of it is cultural, right? We are not taught to toot our own horns, so to speak. Culturally, that's just not something that occurs. And we do have to think about a way to wrap our arms around those opportunities to think of it in terms of sharing what's happening rather than, kind of tooting our own horn and getting the word out. Because there are so many dynamic things that are occurring on our campus that don't get the kind of attention that they absolutely deserve. So, I think that you brought up a significant point there. One of the things that's currently happening on our campus. And I think all of you might be on some parts of the committees. I know that Dr. Lee and I are part of the steering committee and then task forces, as is Dr. Zerai. But with this UNM 2040 initiative, which is really looking at trying to forecast the environment of the institution in the year 2040 and thinking about in the next 20 years, what are both the opportunities and the challenges that we all are facing. In particular, I think of for tribal students, our Indigenous population on this campus, but tribal communities, and how can UNM partner and support tribes in addressing some of these opportunities and challenges, right? When you think about the fact that that effort is focused on, certainly education is one of those things, but lifelong learning, health and wellness. I mean, because we have such a large component of what we do in terms of service to the state is related to health, certainly economic development, and then cultural preservation. And so when you all think about those kinds of things and what you'd like to see 20 years from now, and how we'd advance, what are those things that you're hopeful for? And maybe even how are some of the ways you think we can actually realize those things? I'm going to go to Dr. Lee first.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I have actually been thinking about that since being on the 2040 task force and whatnot, but also, you know, there's been a movement at UNM to try to become more community engaged. And in fact, I think it was in early 2020 that UNM was given a Carnegie designation as a community engaged university. And it was based off of a lot of different metrics, including, you know, a lot of the work that we've done in Native American studies to work with directly with our communities and other faculty and staff as a way to, you know, the university had to collect that data about that, the community engaged work being done at the university to achieve that designation. And it took some time, I believe. And one of the things that we've done in Native American studies, and now several other departments I think are doing, is really putting that community engaged work into our promotion and tenure guidelines, into really solidifying, you know, to gain tenure at this university, you have to show how your research, teaching, and service is connected to community interests and needs in a collaborative way. Again, how we define community-based and community engaged is very specific. And there are, I think, about 14 colleges and departments at UNM now that include language in their P&T guidelines around community engagement. So that's a lot of progress. It's great. I don't think it probably does to the same extent that we do in NAS, but it's great to see that kind of growth. But that designation and doesn't necessarily, and you know, that inclusion in those guidelines doesn't necessarily reward those colleges or departments in terms of resources or further support. So I think like what Dr. Tsinnajinnie was suggesting about training, I think is so relevant on how do we develop those relationships on an individual faculty level, on a department level, on a college level with our Native communities in a way that is reciprocal and respectful and all the 4 R's, you know, develop strong relationships and has direct benefit to those communities while strengthening the university community as well.
Thank you. That's so important. Dr. Paquin?
So yeah, just the experience that Dr. Tiffany Lee described is, you know, really true and relevant. And it would be nice for us as Native faculty. I think no matter what department we're in, we do have our obligations and our responsibilities that we fulfill as faculty members. But, you know, just through the nature of our work and what we believe in and who we are, we want to, you know, be engaged with our communities. And it's funny because I always think about like For someone who doesn't like to be evaluated or judged, I picked a funny career because we're constantly being evaluated by our peers, by each other, by the bureaucracy, by our students. And then at the same time, we always want to be considerate that we're still connected to our families and our communities, and not that they judge us, but we want to be still seen as members, as members who contribute, and who can feel natural in their settings. And so it's a lot to navigate and manage, but as Lani said, it's something we want to do. It's a blessing, but from the university perspective, it would be great if our work was recognized. Within Native studies, I feel very recognized. I feel seen. But once, going through the tenure process, once we're getting up to those higher levels where people have a different lens, a different eye, we've gotten words from the highest level, it's great, you're doing this, you're doing that. But when those people are different people are in the review seats, that's not going to matter. So, to actually get people in those seats who's reviewing our files, that would be really nice. And then we can touch upon the question in the Q&A when you're ready, Pam, but that is something I wanted to acknowledge too, is retention. Sure. So like I said before, this is my dream job, but in order to be able to get a raise that's equal to new faculty or faculty in other campuses on the university or elsewhere, I would need to apply for another job at a university just to play the system. And I don't want to play the system. I just want to do what I want to do, what I believe in here. And so, offering us salaries that, that we're able to do the work we do and support our families would be really nice. And to recognize our community engaged scholarship through promotion and tenure would be great too. And also recognize all the service we do. I see all these people on the screen. I see you guys everywhere, right? We're on, you can't be on a committee and not have another good friend or colleague on that same committee, because we're all doing, as much service as we possibly can do and more. So recognition of that process would, we do get recognized, but, for it to be a concrete recognition in promotion and tenure would be really beneficial to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Dr. Tsinnajinnie, you want to address the question before we move on to, I think, a really important point that's come up about retention of faculty and those kinds of things?
Sure. And I think, yeah, definitely want to see more, more Native faculty in general at UNM. Not also to, because, we of the amount of support we give to Native students. But I also want to see more Native faculty to support our Native students in the disciplines where we're, the least represented. And these tend to be more of the STEM specific disciplines. And I think one way to do that, of course, is to just target Native faculty to hire in those disciplines, but also to, rethink the way we, I guess, define those disciplines. And, that has to come directly from the departments themselves. And, thinking about, what they value in terms of the expertise in science and in engineering. And, I think, moving away from these more Western, really typical academic standards, and, embracing the community engaged work that a lot of Native scientists and Indigenous scientists and engineers do. And I think, showing that that's something that we're looking for and that we would value at our university. And that's one way we can attract our Native faculty to those disciplines. And yesterday, the White House just announced that how Indigenous knowledge they're moving towards, better recognizing Indigenous knowledge, in their federal programs. And so, I think that's like a signal that they're, that's something that we'll be looking for, and hopefully, in more jobs, and then people trained in, using Indigenous knowledge systems, and respecting Indigenous knowledge systems, all across the disciplines that are out there, and that federal agencies provide jobs for. And so I think, I just want to see, more natives in STEM, because there's just not a lot of us.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you. We've had some questions from some folks, and we've got about 20 minutes left in this session, and I'm wondering if maybe we can pivot a little bit, because I do have one final question, but I do want to honor the folks that have asked us questions. So I think this is a follow-up to what Dr. Paquin was talking about earlier with respect to retention of Native faculty. So, given that I shared about the diversity of just the tribal affiliations that we serve just through American Indian Student Services, and as I said, I know there's many more, right, that are being served and that are also engaged in other departments. So we are not the only place that supports students, but I think we're one of the few that really tries to harness information about tribal affiliation in a very intentional and deliberate way. But given our large Native student enrollment, and particularly on main campus, but I think for all of our campuses, what can the institution actively do to ensure that we keep the expertise and the brilliance and the extraordinary and I think exceptional Native faculty that we do have, so that we first of all can keep them, but also attract new faculty. Do you all have some ideas about that? I know you've mentioned cluster hires previously, and we do have faculty who have been at our institution as a result of cluster hires, and those things are I think important and valuable. I don't know that they necessarily go far enough. So do you all have some ideas about retention efforts specific to faculty?
All right, I'll go again. I think, what Dr. Paquin and Dr. Tsinnajinnie said is right on. I'll add that it has to do not just with salary and supporting faculty in where they're underrepresented, but resources. Generally, Native American studies and Indigenous faculty is growing tremendously right now in terms of across the United States. We have right now an open position. We're looking for a faculty member, and we are in competition with at least 15 to 20 other universities right now, including some of our neighbors, including other departments or colleges here that are looking for faculty who specialize in Indigenous studies topics or areas. So the university, to attract, these faculty who are in high demand, has to be able to come up with the resources to compete. And a big reason some of them, that we lose, like the question asked about losing two from the recent faculty, is UNM, tries to provide counteroffers, but I don't know, they're not able to. And that's a reality of our situation at UNM for a long time. It's not just with Native faculty, it's with the university in general, having the budgetary resources. So there needs a lot more innovation there. The other thing is, I think the faculty that are recruited to specifically underrepresented disciplines, there has to be, I think, some true effort on part of that department for setting aside time to truly mentor and I don't know, self-reflect on why don't they have more Native faculty in their department. That's a bigger ask. It takes more critical awareness, more training, as we talked about, more relationship building, and more value of those particular faculty members, what they bring to the table, which might be more community-based. It might not be strictly within the realms of the kinds of scholarship that that discipline or department engages in. So.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I've often heard that, you know, folks talk about, you know, if you want to know what a university cares about, truly, look at where they spend their money. Look at what they allocate their budget to, right? So when we see clearly there's gaps, right? And you're talking about you know, the competition, but really being under-resourced. And this speaks to what I brought up earlier about, you know, if I had the magic wand, you know, I definitely would say that, you know, I would, you know, the first on my wish list is to have appropriate and adequate funding for departments right now who don't have permanent sources of funding, but who are doing a whole lot of work to ensure that they can access outside resources, and whether that's through grants, whether it's through private donors, or you know, legislative appropriations. I mean, I think that first and foremost is something that needs to occur, right? That would be certainly be a true demonstration. Dr. Paquin or Dr. Tsinnajinnie, do you have some thoughts too that you want to share about retention of Native faculty, but also ways to attract even, you know, new faculty to add to the Native faculty community that currently exists at UNM?
Go ahead, Lon.
Yeah, I think, you know, as speaking more about like, you know, recruiting Native faculty in STEM disciplines, I think, you know, it just like goes with what Dr. Lee was saying, is like, you know, having more general support to, you know, provide salaries and counteroffers to keep us competitive with other institutions, and just like general resources in general, you know, for research and other things. But also, I think, you know, there's this like perception that there's not a lot of Native candidates out there to fill the positions, but there are. You know, I meet with them, and, you know, I talk with them all the time. But, you know, the answers they get when they apply for their positions is like, you know, your research expertise it doesn't fit, like, you know, the mold that we're looking for, you know, or I think, you know, maybe you should, you know, apply for Native American studies positions or things like that. So, you know, I think it just really has to, like you said, like go back to the department, and having the departments and the colleges and, you know, the program specifically, you know, wanting to hire faculty who do, like, you know, who do and value the type of researcher or the type of research and work that the Indigenous scientists and engineers and, you know, the candidates that are out there that they do. And, you know, making sure that once you attract those candidates, that, you know, those candidates will continue to have the support for the work that they do, and it will be valued. And, you know, when one of the reasons I was attracted to my position at UNM is because, you know, I had the general expertise to do the position, but they were also the department, or community and regional planning. They're also committed to working with Indigenous communities, and they value community engaged work. And so that was something that attracted me to this program, besides being able to stay home, but, you know, because I knew I would be supported in the department there.
Thank you, Dr. Tsinnajinnie. Dr. Paquin, do you want to add anything?
No, I think I said my part. Thanks.
One of the things that, you know, you talked about in terms of just kind of the evaluation process, particularly of the tenure and promotion, that entire structure and process. Can you shed a little bit of light on your ideas for, you know, how that can be expanded to really honor the kinds of things that you were mentioning earlier about just community engaged, not only research, but just relationship building, and how crucial that piece of it is, because it does fall a little bit outside of, sort of this, the traditional university tenure and promotions process. You see values are really kind of on opposite ends of the spectrum, at least in my opinion. And obviously I'm not a faculty member, but that's what I see in terms of processes.
Okay, yeah, so when I came in, I had some, like, a lot of my ideas on what I wanted to do for my research, which did focus a lot on like college pathways and how it connects to nation building. But as I was kind of moving through my years, I got pulled into like Bernalillo Public Schools and Cuba Independent School Districts, which is part of the Yazzie Martinez lawsuit. And I think Miss Yazzie was or is on the call. I wanted to acknowledge her. But the work that I was pulled into was really about contributing to the initiatives that the school districts were doing to serve their Native students. And so with all that work, it takes a lot of like trust and relationship building and investment and partnership. And through that, they're not necessarily asking, okay, can you provide me with an academic peer-reviewed article? At the end of that, they're asking for maybe a report or a curriculum or some other document that really reflects, the epitome of the work we've done. And so that's great. And that is the kind of thing that's honored in Native American studies in our promotion and tenure. But once it passes our department, the higher it gets, the more it that process that we've written and that we've been following for ourselves, it isn't necessarily recognized as much. So at the end of my mid-review, I got a letter saying, this is great, but you still need to do this more traditional stuff, publications in peer-reviewed journals, which, I'm doing my best to kind of fulfill as much as I can. But ultimately, the kind of like the way you're measured changes the higher up the review process goes. And Dr. Tiffany Lee, she's in those leadership, she has more insight into those leadership positions. So I'll let her kind of expand on that if you want to, Dr. Lee.
Sure. So, I think a lot of this trying to recognize community-based work and scholarship that's not traditionally what universities have engaged in is a huge cultural shift and paradigm shift, because it's a way of seeing what counts as knowledge and what counts as scholarship in a different way. There's still like I said before, UNM is a Carnegie designated community engaged university. So that has to, mean something, right? And that's where it can mean something, is through the promotion and tenure reviews that you do see now. Like I said, 14 colleges or departments have included community engaged research as part of their guidelines, as part of something they value and count towards promotion and tenure. But I don't know how that's spelled out for them. And like here in Native American Studies, we really spell it out. Like you need to be clear on your dossier, what is community engaged, what is community based, and what is the time it took to create this partnership or relationship, and what's like the product or outcome that's benefited the community and so forth. But the university system is so rooted and entrenched in a system that is very individually based and centric, that you're promoted. They have, if you publish an article, it matters if you're the first author or the second author or the third author. Like it's very individually, based in that way. Is you're not counted as a team. You're counted as more if you're the first author and so forth. So it is really trying to change a whole institutional culture that I think we make inroads in here and there, but then sometimes we go backwards, and it's just a matter of keeping abreast of, in terms of naming that kind of change that needs to happen, sitting at the table with people to have that dialogue that might have a different perspective. But it takes a lot on the part of Indigenous faculty or other people who hold those kind of values to try and change that institutional culture.
You're absolutely right. And thank you for all of those perspectives. My last question was going to be, how can we do better? But I think I also, that would be sort of my final question to you all as we wrap up sort of the last 10 minutes or so of this. But I think also too, as the last 20 months, I think, I don't know, I kind of lost count, but particularly in this pandemic environment, right? That has created both certainly challenges, but also opportunities as well. And so can you give just some insight, at least from your experiences, and even pre-COVID, but now as we look at, ideally turning a corner and being post-COVID, I mean, that's my hope. Can you talk a little bit about how you feel that faculty and staff can better support Native students on our campus and really, help to advance some support systems that can alleviate, I think, some of the challenges that our students are facing. I'm going to go to you, Dr. Paquin, first, and then we'll go to Dr. Lee and then Dr. Tsinnajinnie.
Okay, thank you, Pam. So I think kind of the first thing that comes to my mind in light of everything that's happening and what's happening right now is I from the personal my personal standpoint, I think I could really use more support and training on how to support students in terms of mental wellness, whether it be virtual or one-on-one. I know, like, there's links and resource pages and we include those in our syllabi, but I could really use just some time to sit down and learn, what can I do to support my students' mental health, and retrain myself and how to make referrals and how to do things kindly, and just to be that, if a student opens up to me, to create that space where I'm making sure I'm making them feel heard and safe in the right way, and taking the right proper next step. So just some time and space to do that, instead of maybe an add-on, like, here's this also for you to do, but more the space to really learn that in the proper way.
Thank you. Dr. Lee?
I think, in Native American studies, probably 90 to 95% of our students are Native American. And when the pandemic hit, it was huge for our department and our students, and a lot of trauma, a lot of displacement, a lot of just technology problems. So one thing we tried to do, at least, as an immediate support, was provide technology scholarships so students could get a hotspot or a new computer, or, but there was still a lot of challenges. And I think we wanted to learn, like Dr. Paquin said, a lot more about how to support these students in terms of their health and mental well-being. And I think, that's a direction also for the university, is to see more holistically how to support students. I think those mechanisms are there, but in general, we think about student success in terms of academics. But the academics is not going to work if they're not physically, socially, emotionally healthy as well. And so helping faculty to learn more about what that means, and embracing that and understanding that, and having resources for that, but also how to work with each other to support students, I think is exactly what Dr. Paquin said, and is exactly right.
Dr. Tsinnajinnie?
Yeah, I think, one thing about the pandemic is, like, although the rest of the state is open, a lot of our Indigenous communities are still closed, and they're still taking a lot more precautions than the rest of the state is. And that's something, I've recognized with my research, and like I've, we for just kind of, I wanted to address something with the previous question, going back, with regards to promotion and tenure, we're I guess we were given like a 1-year extension on our with regards to our promotion and tenure deadlines. But for me, I work closely with Navajo communities, and I haven't felt right going back to go and do research with those communities yet, because precautions they're still taking precautions, and that's made me cognizant of everything that my students from these communities are still facing. And I think it's just helped me to realize that my students will learn better when I'm more flexible and just aware of all the issues and more understanding of the issues that not just our Native students but all of our students are going through. And to me, it's really helped me to value the effort that they're putting forth to be enrolled now and still in the middle of the pandemic, to pay the tuition that they're doing, and to put off working or caring for their family, and to still be enrolled and come to class. And so that's helped me to make sure to that they're learning as much as they can, and where deadlines and attendance don't matter as much, but them learning and getting what they want out of this education and honoring the effort that they're putting forth is just what I've been prioritizing when it comes to working with my students this year.
Yeah, thank you. And Dr. Paquin, you do reference the fact that there are a lot of resources on campus, and I think for us, and we see it in the president's weekly communication, right, reminding folks about here's resources and those kinds of things. But I think at the end of the day, and this is something that we've tried really hard to do at American Indian Student Services, is it's one thing to be able to say here's all the information you need to be able to access these support services. The Student Health and Counseling Center has done tremendous work to make sure that they're available to students specifically with wellness and particularly mental health. The Women's Resource Center is a phenomenal resource as well too, and has expanded their counseling services. Our Lobo Respect Office and then the Dean of Students Office has also done some really amazing work to open up additional opportunities. But I think aside from that, and us communicating that in as I said, the president's weekly perspective, or even on our own, we send out listserv announcements, or we're posting these things on our social media. I think what's really critical, and this is personally what I am seeing, is that it's great for those things to exist and for us to say, here's where you can access them. But what's more important, and this speaks to your comment, Dr. Lee, about sort of this holistic effort, is that, I think a soft handoff is really what is most important. I can't tell you how many students that I personally am walking over to a particular place because, it's scary. In the middle of whatever you're experiencing, to go to an unfamiliar place, to try to engage with unfamiliar people. So I think soft handoffs to introduce people to other both departments or other colleagues is really something that's valuable. And so I know that many folks are doing that on campus, but I'm hearing from students that that's been really helpful for them too. Right. So, that's one way of being able to be engaged in that process. So I just want to thank all of you. I think we've come to the end of our time, and I will likely turn it back over to Dr. Zerai and or Lorena for final comments. But I cannot tell you what a privilege it has been to have this conversation with all of you. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for all that you do for our students, for all that you are doing to advance this institution, and for all that you're doing to educate our entire campus community about just the value and just the tremendous opportunity we have to really be an extraordinary institution. And so thank you so very much. And I am going to turn it over to, I think it's Dr. Zerai for just a final comments, but I just want to say thank you. And thank you to everybody who was able to join us today. We appreciate that you took some time out of probably a very hectic day to be with us, and we're really appreciative for that.
Thank you
Zerai,
so much. I can't start my video here for some reason, but thank you so much. This was such a wonderful discussion. And Dr. Lee, we're just so proud and excited about the new doctoral program in Native American Studies, and just, the ways that you all will amplify your impact through training the next generation of faculty who will be teaching in these many positions, and that you talked about across the country. And Pam, I want to thank you so much for your leadership to develop our land acknowledgement statements, and to inspire the new one over at Taos. You are just an amazing partner, and as I've said in other occasions, my partner in liberation. And so just thank you so much for the good work that you do. And to the rest of our speakers, you are valued faculty here at UNM, and we're so lucky that you're here and creating a space for our students and colleagues to have these discussions and to learn and grow. And finally, I would like to thank Lorena Blanco Silva for helping to organize this panel along with Ms. Agoyo. And just we welcome everyone and hope that you have a great rest of your day and a nice break coming up.
thank you, Dr. Zerai. Lorena, did you have any final comments that we needed to share with our attendees?
I just wanted to let everyone know that the session was recorded. It'll be available on the DEI website and our YouTube page. And then just to echo Dr. Zerai's sentiments, thank you so much for answering the call when we wanted to put something together. Thank you, Pam, always for your leadership and for, wanting, thinking of creative ways for us to work together and to really make sure we're telling everybody's story at UNM. And so I really appreciate that. Thank you, Leola, Dr. Lee, Dr. Tsinnajinnie. We really appreciate you. And I think that's it. So thank you so much. And thank you, Pam.
Sure. One final thing that I want to say is that, we also have the privilege of having 14 Native chartered American Indian student organizations on our campus who are doing just such great work, and they are really utilizing this month to highlight many of the things that they're doing, but also to bring new knowledge and experiences to the campus. So throughout this month, they're doing a number of things. And if you want to take a look at what's remaining on the calendar for the month, there is a calendar at aiss.unm.edu. There's an American Indian Heritage Month calendar, and we don't necessarily have every single event that's on there, but we have every single event that we've been notified about. So please make sure that you support our students and support our departments who are doing these kinds of things. I will say that, I know that the Native American Alumni Association has an event that's coming up as well too. I think that's really important. Our Graduate Student Association tomorrow evening is having an event with entertainment with Levi Platero that's happening in our Student Union building. And so these events are free and open to the public. So I would encourage you all to also support our students in their efforts too, because they're doing just a dynamic job as well too. So thank you, everyone. Have a beautiful afternoon. And thank you so much again for joining us.
Thank you.